Hello, everybody. Okay, show of hands. Who here went swimming? Ready? More than I expected. Very nice. Well, I'd be careful. Let me tell you a story. And I promise it's relevant. There was a French scientist sailing in the open ocean, the Indian Ocean. The seas were relatively calm, and I was just enjoying the sun when all of a sudden a freakishly big wave out of nowhere engulfed his ship, very localized, 30 meters high, almost destroyed it. He came back to tell his story, but nobody believed him. It took years and years of sailors telling these stories, and nobody believed them because they were so rare. Until 1995, when an old oil rig in Norway detected something very unusual. This is what we call the Dropner wave event, and they measured a 25-meter high wave. This was the first measurement of what we call now a rogue wave. And so they started doing experiments, just like this. And they discovered that rogue waves are a consequence of constructive interference. When you align the phases just right, a huge wave can be generated, just like our French scientists. So, you know where I'm going with this. 5G also has these waves. And 5G is a lot smarter than the open sea. So it happens all the time. I need to explain the concept of pre-coding. This is what happens when a transmitter changes the phases in such a way that at the receiver, the signal strength is maximized. Now, I always say an animation tells a million words. So consider this. We have an environment where the red dot, the transmitter, is transmitting everywhere, and the green dot is the receiver, collects the signals. Now, if we take these signals that take the longest time and send them the earliest, and those that take the shortest time, send them the latest, then you can actually have all the signals at the same exact time at the receiver. Now, pre-coding is a lot more complex than that, but it illustrates the concept. This, ladies and gentlemen, is what we call a hotspot, and they are the analogy of rogue waves in RF-EMF, and it's the topic of my talk. So, for the last 7 years or so, we have been developing a tool to characterize these hotspots. And it started with my fellow colleague Sergey back in 2019. We've been improving it, higher frequencies. This is out of scope actually, but we changed the ray tracing to a quasi-deterministic method, which is much faster. And lately, we changed it to hybrid ray tracing based but regarded to DB. I went too fast for myself, but it's okay. So, we can choose any location on the entire Earth, and I mean any, that is covered by Google Earth's meshes. I picked New York because it's inspiring. It's the World Trade Center in Manhattan. And we have a person walking across where the World Trade Center towers once stood, and you see green lines and red lines emanating from a base station to that spot. The red lines are non-line of sight, the green ones are line of sight. And we can look at the start. Here, the person starts walking somewhere around World Trade Center, one World Trade Center tower, takes a corner, and walks through the trees. Now you may be noticing these red spheres, and those are the base station locations. And I got them from OpenCell ID, which is a crowdsourced location service for base stations. It's not the real location, it's an approximation. It's a very big approximation. And this is a serious flaw of the method, because I simply don't know where the base station locations are in New York City. But these base stations, these base stations are beamforming antennas. And they create that hotspot at the receiver, specifically at its ear. We consider this tiny box around it, where we will compute the fields. Now, this is the whole walk. The method itself is a little bit out of scope for this talk, but the bottom line is we compute the fields on this Huygens box with pre-coding, do an FDTV simulation, and then compute the exposure. So let's get a look at those hotspots, shall we? First, let's take a slice through the box. And get a look at the fields inside of it. Now the hotspot may not be in the center, it may be anywhere, and right now it's in the upper right corner. And we will consider slices through that hotspot, the X, Y, and Z dimensions, essentially. And along those dimensions, we will look at what is the electric field. The x-axis is this red line, y-axis is green, z-axis is blue. And for all three, you see, of course, a peak where the hotspot is. This is how I'm going to do my characterization approach along those two dimensions. And let's take the first one, x, for example, and look at some characterization metrics. Now, I only have 12 minutes, so I'm not going to be able to explain all of these, but maybe just one, why not? Dimensionality is one I coined. For these three, the dimensionality is 3, because it's the number of dimensions along which you will find a peak. Sometimes it's only 2 dimensions, in which case the hotspot looks more like a cylinder instead of a sphere. This happens in line of sight cases where there's only 2 multipath components. Anyways, that's about 86% of cases are spherical hotspots. Now we have the human is also walking, so we have to do our characterization along time for every time step. And I'm particularly interested by what is an average hotspot? To do that, we have to average in time. Now, we start out with the electric field. We're going to do some mathematics, but beware, it's hopefully it's logical. So we will take the time average of the electric field along the 6-minute walk. It's approximately 6 minutes in New York City. Now, I don't have a holographic screen, so I will take the norm of the electric field, and we will show that. Now, take notice of the order in which we first average and then take the norm. We call that propagation-wise averaging. And this, ladies and gentlemen, is a slice of the electric field, averaged. And I was really quite excited to see this, because for the first time at 28 gigahertz, do we have any idea how it looks like? These are seriously understudied. And what do we notice? Side lobes. Just like an atom. We have one big field in the center, and then 3 more side lobes, and some angular dependence. Now we can look also at a slice from the x-axis, characterize the full width at half maximum, the peaks, etc. I only have 12 minutes. Now the electric field is at its maximum at 0. The magnetic field has an inverse phase relationship with the electric field, it seems. And that means that the troughs of the electric field corresponds to the peaks of the magnetic fields and vice versa. And that's exactly what you see here. Isn't that exciting? So you see at 0, there's a trough where the electric field was a peak. Now, the incident power density is a combination of the electric and magnetic fields, so they kind of cancel each other out. Now, for the attentive among you, did you notice the order in which I am averaging and taking the norm? That's right, it's different. This is what I call exposure-wise averaging, because you first take the exposure metric and then you take the average. And that also has an effect on how the hotspot looks. So the peaks and troughs kind of cancel each other out, and the result is, well, not good for the hotspot because it kind of vanished. I mean, there's still something there, but it's gone. There's 3 things I want you to take home today. Just 3. Try to remember them when you go to the hotel tonight and think of what it represents. Don't go swimming. No, let's not do that. First takeaway is hotspots are very important to study. There's over a 12 dB gain, and it only increases when you get more massive MIMO antennas. In theory, without bounds. Second takeaway, advanced end-to-end realistic tools are required to study these hotspots. There's only that way. You need the base station, the user, the environment. And I think that's the reason why it's understudied, because it's very difficult to create these tools, very advanced tools. Oh, this should be terrible. Oh, anyways. Thank you for listening to my talk. I'd like to thank my co-authors and the project manager. Any questions?
What software do you use to create a presentation?
I use a combination of software. Probably the answer you're looking for is Manim. This is basically coding your slides. Or if you want, there's a GitHub link somewhere. There's like a QR code. You can scan the QR code. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for this presentation. I emphasize the fact that it's very beautiful. I just wondering, what is did you try to compare the results that you get with other tools, or like simple or regular FDD tool? Like the values that you showed is 0.7 microwatt per meter. So did you try to compare to other tools, numerical tools, or even measurement? And what is the result of this comparison, or like, I don't know, cross-validation or something? Thank you.
Okay, thank you for your question. The answer is no, because there are no other tools to compare it with. There are no other end-to-end analytical tools, realistic tools from the base station all the way to the exposure. And measurements, there are many, but right now in 2024, the accuracy is not good enough to compare deterministically with measurements. One of the reasons for that is because of the locations of base stations. It's not correspond. As for the low values, this is also because the results are normalized with 1 watt TX power, and I, again, don't know what powers are base stations in New York City. Does that answer your question? Thank you.
Thanks for the talk. I have a question about the averaging. Do you have a rationale for why you use propagation-wise averaging for the key field and then we change the order?
Yeah, it's an excellent question. Well, to be honest, there's 2 reasons. First of all, because the propagation-wise averaging gives the most insight into into the side lobes and the nature of the hotspots. And the electric field is not an exposure metric. It makes more sense to do exposure-wise averaging for the actual exposure metric. And I just wanted to share the electric field, and it's what you would consider an average hotspot.
Okay, we will move on with your next presentation, Robin, please. Thank you.
Okay. So, I have a question. You already know what's coming. Who went swimming? No. How much % do you think of the general population still isn't entirely sure that 5G is safe? Any guesses? 10%? 30%? No?
7.
7? 7%? 30%? If you include the people that are unsure, 61. And I wanted to share that number because maybe we all need a bit of a reality check. That's an awful number. 21% believe it's harmful. Well, there's no evidence. I got this slide from the speaker of the last presentation. Thank you for that. And one of the takeaways was that advanced realistic tools are required to model hotspots. It's important for the general public to know what realistic exposure assessment is, and not just worst case, not just radiating rats in a lab at maximum power. They want to know, if I walk around in my street, how much exposure am I actually experiencing? And for that, you need these tools. Also for the network planning, for EMF-aware network planning. Nowadays, cities like Brussels and Geneva are doing deployment stops because people are genuinely somehow scared of the safety of 5G. Also, I was mentioning I need the data. I need the locations of base stations or, for example, the antenna pattern of the Ericsson base station. And I went with much excitement to Google and I typed this in, and yeah, I didn't get any results. And this is the case for a lot of those problems. A lot of those data is just not available. Now, I hope I am convincing you of something here. I'm actually classically using the Aristotle model of persuasion with the logos, ethos, and pathos, that we need data. We need realistic, actual data to improve the methods, exactly the methods I was talking about in my previous presentation. And it's just not available. That's why I present for you the solution. The outreach I did is something I invented myself. It's an acronym for Outdoor Realistic Exposure Assessment. for next generation cellular networks on humans. Now, don't be fooled, it's not a project, there's no funding. It's just an initiative. It's my own idea. And the idea is to talk with industry and with governmental institutions and hopefully get some actual data, get some locations of base stations, their antenna patterns, smartphone models. Now, I have a wish list. First of all, I would like to get the 3D locations and configurations, including their power control, their duty cycles, all of these things, from real 5G base stations instead of trying to reverse engineer it in measurements. These are provided, for example, by telecom providers. They're provided by governmental institutions that hold a cadastre of all the places where antennas are deployed. This is, for example, a IMEC carte radio. I'm not sure if you know it, but it's a nice website where you can just zoom in and find the locations of base stations anywhere in France. But I want to do this for the entire world. I want high coverage. So we need to talk to a lot of people. I also want the antenna patterns and models of 5G base stations. These are made by Ericsson, Nokia, Samsung, etc. And this is quite hard to ask because it's proprietary data. And as a PhD student, it's hard to, it's really a problem if we want to move on, if we want to be even more realistic. This is, for example, ANSYS that is using these antenna patterns. They are from actual smartphones, and they have the privilege of actually doing more realistic simulations while we're all kind of struggling to find these, or we use worst case assumptions and proxies. Also need digital twins with both high accuracy and high coverage, because if we want to convince the public, they want to know if 5G is safe in their streets. The accuracy is really important, because at 5G the frequencies are high, and therefore, if you want to do proper ray tracing, the mesh resolution must be in the order of centimeters, which is very challenging. And as far as I know, the only real possibility are just providers are because Google Maps, which I've been using, NVIDIA as well has good digital twins. Video, this is from Ericsson. And they have semantically classified 3D environments, and as a PhD student, that makes me a little bit jealous because I don't have that, and I can't do my simulations without them. Finally, also the smartphone antenna patterns and their models, of course from the classic designers you all know, but also from the original equipment manufacturers, from the antenna module makers. Those could all be companies where we could ask for data. Now, knowing this, I went to Outlook and I wrote an email to Tim Cook, CEO of Apple, and I went something like this. Dear Tim, can I get the CAD file for the iPhone 15 Pro Max? Much love, Robin. Next day, I got an image of him laughing. Okay, no, that didn't actually happen. But it illustrates my point. I can't just ask like that. We have to do something bigger. So how do I approach this? We have to garner support at BioEM, right here, right now. I want to see if there's actually a need for this, and I really am interested in your opinion, and I want to discuss with you. Now in question time, and afterwards, what your opinion is of this. And I actually brought some forms with me. I printed these out. They're very simple. It's just your name, who you are, your email address, and whether you support the outreach initiative. I'm especially interested by experts in the field to give their support and use their network. I've made a website, a video. Everything is centralized. All of the data is, or all of the information is in one place, and we can convince the industry to share proprietary data under NDAs, which is my next point. So they're all on an NDA, sealed on the hard drive somewhere in the basement. We do our simulations, we publish exposure, realistic exposure assessments, and we never ever share them again. Now, why would they accept, you might ask? There's really three actors in this. You have the public, academia, and industry. And the public might ask a question to academia, is 5G safe? And academia will answer, well, we did some simulations, and we didn't really have all the data, so we did some assumptions, which are the worst case possible, and then you're overestimating exposure, and there's not really a way to do realistic exposure assessment. And so the public asks industry, is 5G safe? And industry responds with their certifications of their equipment, but the fact of the matter is the public is, have decided it's concerned from the anti-5G communities. They think there's a conflict of interest, even though there's not, but that's what they think. So also industry lacks a bit of vision for 10 years from now. We should be doing realistic exposure assessment of 6G instead of 5G, because we have to be ahead of time. The proper way to do this is public asks academia, is 5G safe? Academia asks industry through the outreach initiative, can I have your data? We receive the data, and we give a realistic estimate of the exposure. That's why I think it's more convincing for the public, and it's better research. If we have a collective call for action right now, I think there's also higher chances that they will say yes. And I also believe there might be a domino effect if a couple of really, really large companies agree to this. All of a sudden, others might also well. Now, what if they don't accept? I need a plan B. That's why I did a very, very thorough literature review. If you want, you can read it in the abstract. And I won't go over it completely because I actually consciously want a little bit more time for questions for this session. So basically the locations, we have open cell ID as I was talking about, the transmitters, patents, we can use some proxies from GGBP, the environment, we can use OpenStreetMap, which is not fine enough, and receiver, we can use some mobile phones. So if any of those stages we fail to get any data, we can use this. So I'm really interested in what you think. And thank you for listening to me.
We have to be quick, one question perhaps.
Thank you, Robin. Great initiative. I completely agree with you. We had similar challenges when we wanted to do our 5G exposure assessments. And two things. First question is, have you already approached industry? Have you summed them up? I mean, do you know whether how they feel about it?
Okay, so it's a good question. I have not comprehensively asked industry, because I also believe it's better to have an embargo, one moment, to first look inwards at academia, what do we think, what can we say as a whole group, instead of me as one unmeaningful PhD student, and that's also why I want to talk to you. And then I will proceed to the moment where we ask. And I think it's also more powerful to ask at once with a very strong statement instead of sending 10 emails and hoping Tim might answer the 11th one.
Well, that's wise. But I have two sort of word of questions for you. Industry is not just one entity. There is so many different operators, and they often are very hard competitors. So, approaching industry as a whole, you will face a number of different sort of attitudes, and there is a strong competition. So that's one thing. And the second thing is that you should be, the initiative should be very much consulting the legal matters of it, because I'm sure that the different operators, they do not want the other operators to get their hands on their data. So there is this element of legal and sort of, as you said, NDA and sort of aspect that the community needs to. Maybe we should approach lawyers and see what is the best way of approaching industry. So to assure them that we're not there to interfere with their commercial activities, we genuinely want their data for science.
Those are excellent comments, yes. I agree fully.
I think it's not a question, just a comment. Congratulations for the excellent presentations. I believe you have truly demonstrated what effective science communication is all about. We have a lot to learn. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hi Robin, this was a great presentation, two great presentations. So I also don't have a question, but so I want to say I completely support it and I want it. But it's not only about the base stations, it's not only about the network behavior, but it's very much also about what your phone is transmitting at what time. We don't have enough information there unless we use these very expensive tools, and only a few of them can be used in studies, while like received power is just provided by the phone, by the chip. We cannot reach to the transmit power or the transport blocks, so how many times actually transmission is sent. And so we rely on very bad proxies. If we can also get this information, this would improve exposure assessment a lot. So thanks for this.
Thank you.
Unfortunately, we have run out of time. I'm sure there'll be more discussions associated with these two talks during lunch and later on in time. I'd just like to thank you for your presentations, and please join me in thanking all of the sessions.
Wait, final note, I have these forms. I would invite everybody to speak to me after the session. I might be by the door to hand them out.